Here's the emblem and the tower of the monastery here. We're going into the tunnel. Okay, there's the Black Madonna there. Outside, you'll probably get a better picture of it out here than we will inside. Yeah, I can see that. A little bit of shooting here. There's a nun doing her thing here.
So he got the idea that if you would gather all those guys who are
Pope John II came from this town. Here's the parking area for all the kids getting their first communion. Probably a couple hundred buses in here, various sizes and shapes. Some strange designs. Look at the front end on that one. I don't know the name of the restaurant though. Mobile. Okay, I'm going to zoom back. This foot that I'm zooming in on is the only hook that's holding this tightrope walker on this taut wire. We're in the back of our lunch restaurant, Spicklert's, about 10 kilometers outside of Čečova. Here's a guy that's ridden his bike to have lunch like we used to do in Herrenberg with the kids and Litzes. Go have a nice lunch out in the woods. I'm going to scan this area because on the top of the hill is an old fortress behind that church there. It's probably not going to come in good because of the lighting. But this is a deserted castle fortress going back about 1,000 years, they said. And built in with the rocks on the side there. Very utilitarian. This is the only hill for miles around. This is all flat farmland. And I didn't do the scan of this fence that's here. They've just taken sheaves of wheat and bound them together, and they've made a nice fence out of it. And most of the tables here are made from sewing machine frames. Some I haven't seen before. There's an interesting wider one. European. That one was Singer. This is European here. Okay, our guide Jutta wanted to make a stop in a typical different cemetery here in Poland. It's very different. Here's this people are tending a grave, probably a recent grave. I'm just going to scan this area with Hoka did not want to come out here. There's our bus in the background. A lot of different culture with this, and they're all plastic flowers, as Folka said, except these people are planting fresh flowers. An interesting one. Here's two men, the Strasniski brothers, John and Kazimierz, with one headstone, 82, 94. All the graves have this SP. This is road born in 82, died in 96. Here's another view of that castle fortress from the graveyard area. We just went a couple hundred yards from it. They have lanterns, oil lanterns or lamps on most of the gravestones, which is unusual. So someone lights these lanterns.
The old synagogue, or the Alt Schul, this is what it's called. It dates back to the 1400s, when Jewish people moved into here. This was the first synagogue they here developed. Jewish people lived in Poland already in early Middle Ages, like 1100s. So the first Jewish town was in the city center of Krakow. Just one of the kings decided in the late 1400s to transfer the Jewish community to here, to Kazimierz. And since then on, this was the neighborhood in the sense they could not reside outside, actually in whole Europe. It was started in early Middle Ages in Western Europe, the first time in Venice. In Venice, the Venetian authorities decided that all the Jewish people from Venice must just live in one part of Venice, which was called ghetto. So this is actually the genesis of the word ghetto. Ghetto was the name of the district in Venice. And later on, it spread out through all Europe, this kind of 1700s. All the Jewish people everywhere were just made to reside together in one district. So the one was here, Kazimierz, only it was changed, existed the synagogues, and they were developed so many during the centuries. The one is the oldest, today not active. The local community is so small. After the Second World War, simply very few Jewish people were left in Krakow, in the sense they survived, or they returned to Krakow. So the local community, yet in the 1950s, led the Historic Museum of Krakow to organize here the movement of the fortification of Kazimierz. So Kazimierz had the defensive walls, like all the medieval towns, and these walls were dismantled only the early 1800s, when this neighborhood was made sort of open. And here you see a house, just a building which is now a seat of a bank. Originally, here stood a synagogue. The synagogue which was here built was a private foundation of a rich man for his son-in-law, who was a famous Kabbalist. And here was then operating as 4 synagogues. And let's have a look at this other two. Let's just take a...
This is the way the Polish spell Krakow. All the others begins with a K, but here it's with a C.
Galicia. In the 1800s, when we were under Austrians, this part of Poland was called Galicia province. So maybe you've heard of Galicianos. This is what Jewish people from Galicia were called, Galicianos. So these are the Jewish-style restaurants located in the former residential buildings where before the Second World War, before the ghetto was started, this was just the regular neighborhood where Jewish people lived. So they occupied this street and 2 little blocks more going to our left-hand side. So this town, the Jewish neighborhood, in fact was pretty small, and already we find in the documents that in the 1500s here lived 6,000 people, just in the very small neighborhood. So it was kind of overcrowded. And 68,000 Jewish people were before the war in Krakow. Of course, not all of them here lived. Many lived here, but many also lived outside this traditional neighborhood. So fell into kind of neglection. It was very much neglected because, you know, the original inhabitants were not here anymore. And all the buildings were nationalized, meaning were taken over by the municipal office of Krakow. We got
Choral. Here's a menu outside. Carp. Goose.
Anna mentioned on the bus, the synagogue survived the occupation, but they were of course pillaged. They were closed down for the worship when the Nazis occupied Krakow in 1939. Parents were renting a little apartment. Helena Rubinstein is the one who developed the cosmetic brand. She was very famous. The brand still exists, I guess. And Helena Rubinstein was very talented in cosmetics. She left Poland yet as a young girl. She was only just like 18 years old. So this was when she left Poland yet before the First World War, so the early 1900s. And she went first to Australia. This is where she had her first beautician shop. And then she moved to the States. She developed a very big company. She was one of the first American billionaires in the 1960s. Poland was that she fell in love with a Polish student, and her parents wanted her to marry a rich widower. She didn't want to, so she went to Australia to avoid getting married to the widower her family wanted her to marry. And she was also given by her mother a special recipe for the complexion cream. This is what she wrote in her book. But thanks to the secret recipe from Kazimierz, she was so successful in Melbourne when opening the first beautician shop. What is the truth?
Here's some of the menu items here. That first one is duck breast, grilled sirloin, baked potatoes. So we can come here Thursday. No, today's Friday. We come here Saturday and we leave on Sunday, right?
The Jewish people out of Egypt, they were walking through the desert and they were to reach the promised land. But there was also one generation to die on the way. This is what the Bible says. So when they were dying, they were buried in the desert sands, and their graves were protected with stones. So this is to say, to put a stone on the person's grave is like to say, this is just the exodus to the promised land. This is the main explanation for this tradition. So you can see this is where Sabbath is celebrated, we are celebrated Jewish holidays. And it's very often visited by Jewish people from all over the world because it is connected with the most famous Polish rabbi, Rama, Moses Isserles Rama. Why the rabbi is famous? First of all, he was the chief rabbi of Krakow in the 1500s, but he was also the writer and the author of important codexes. He wrote very important codexes, which even now these are studied. We have to maybe move back the living authority, though he died in 1572. His tomb is at the back of the synagogue. Just behind the synagogue, there is the old Jewish cemetery located. So just the wall we see on the right side, this is where the cemetery yard is reserved. And I'll ask you to come to the side closer, thank you. So operating anymore because in the 19th century another cemetery was started. So the one is called the Old Jewish Cemetery. And this synagogue, as I've mentioned, is the only operating nowadays. It's also under the restoration. And the most important because of this running source of water. So this was the kind